I think culturally you need to create a space where people know their expectations.
Hey everyone, and welcome to RCA's new Business Culture podcast series. My name is Rob Arnold, founder of RCA. This podcast is all about learning from those in business who have shaped world-class business cultures, how they did it, and what they faced along the way in building these great cultures. We look forward to sharing their insights, tips, and tricks with you. In this episode, I visited the iconic Waterford Wine Estate, just outside Stellenbosch, to chat with Damien Joubert-Winn, Head of Sales and Marketing for this global brand. Damien has enjoyed the fortune of working both in the corporate as well as the niche brand space, and speaks about what he has learned from one and taken into the other. We also discuss some key attributes of effective sales teams in today's market. Let's hear his story. And as we always kick things off, we'd love to hear just a little bit about your story from early days of work up until your position here at Waterford Estate.
So I was one of those guys that came out of university and messed around a bit for a while, not really kind of not sure what I was doing, and I got friendly with one of the buyers for one of the largest importers in the UK. A woman called Elaine Dickey. She was buying for Chile and Argentina, and she and I were, the next morning after a party, she said, "Damien, you're just messing around. You kind of need to get a job." And it was a kind of wake up. So she said, "Listen, you've got a good palate, you're great with people. Why don't you come into the wine game?" And so I thought about it. She then said, our company will sponsor you to do your WSETs. And so I went through and studied. And then there came a job with Waverley, actually, for De Rosdehof, South Africa. And I'm not sure if it was serendipity or luck, but my journey took a different course of action. I ended up working for her largest competitor, Matthew Clark. So on composite wholesale selling. And so that's everything from beer to wine to spirits to everything. And very quickly I was evident I didn't enjoy beer and spirits. And so I took on a territory which was fairly large geographically, and then changed that from composite to about 70% wine-led, which in the UK is not a bad strategy given the margins that you can make versus the margins made on Smirnoff, for instance. So, and less battling on pallets and commodity trading than actually consulting. And then from there, it's specialised. So I was there for about 2 years, and then I was poached by a company who distributed for Metzendorf, M&D, and so on. So that's Joseph Drouin and Louis Roederer and so on. And so specialised with them. The recession hit, and I was one of the casualties. And so very, very soon afterwards, I was approached by Molson Coors to help them with their wine programme by a colleague I'd worked with at Matthew Clark. An old field sales manager from the other side of the country. So he approached me and said, "Would you come and work for us? I know you're not going to be here long because there's a beer element, of course, but I just need a startup, so I need someone strong." So I went to work for them, and I wasn't there long. I was there 18 months, went on to move into a wine job again with Michael Saunders at Bibendum, and worked on a startup project with him called Vivis, which was a logistic setup, essentially a food business and a wine business coming together, and I was the wine business doing that sort of amalgamation. And after that, I then started working on brand, and one of the brands I worked with was Perrier-Jouet and Mim with Pernod Ricard. Again, second redundancy because champagne sales were down due to Prosecco's growth in the UK market, and so the 5 team of champagne brand managers were removed from the UK, and I worked for one of my customers. So I was sat in the Royal Yacht Britannia hosting him at dinner at the Champagne Academy, and he said, Damien, I understand you guys are all being made redundant. Won't you come and work for me? Now, it made sense. He was not far from my parents' house. There was my father was just by himself at the time, and so it made sense to be in his office and close to Dad. So again, sometimes serendipity plays a role. Within that portfolio was Waterford Estate, but Ibn Sadi and Mullineux and Screaming Eagle from California and Silver Oak from California, and also the opportunity to work in the entrepreneur game. And so I did for 5 years and looked after their key accounts, and then had a handle with the teams and so on. And in 2016, we brought my daughter across to meet her South African in-laws, and in 17 we made a plan to move. And someone again I'd worked with in the trade, Gareth Robertson or Bear, had put my CV in front of Kevin Arnold, and Kevin Arnold then sent me an email saying, I can't remember exactly, but I don't know if you know who I am. I'm Kevin Arnold from Waterford Estate, sort of thing. And Gareth has put your CV in front of me and said we should have a coffee. I'm looking for someone at the estate. So I made every effort to be at the tastings, to meet Kevin, and then on to Jeremy, and then finally on to South Africa. So
wow,
long.
Quite a few different experiences along the way.
Yeah.
What I'd be interested to know is working within those different types of environments, I suppose all slightly different in some way or another.
Hugely in some
ways. Fair enough. What resonated with you in some cases, and what did the opposite for you in terms of experiences working with different types of people or different structures? What in that path so far has really has been elements, without mentioning which ones they are, but which you enjoyed and which didn't sit well with you?
So for me, I've worked in four main corporate spaces. The first one was a satellite corporate space, so it doesn't feel as corporate, and it was the first job, so I had no benchmark to work against. The second job was an independent specialist, and when I was with the Vivas project, one day you're handling 36 telesailers, telemarketing wine, and then 8 brand managers around Scotland, handling everything from chips, cheese, sausage to Chateauneuf de Pape, and so trying to get them enthusiastic about a product which they don't enjoy was tough. The corporate space, though, was very parameter driven and very admin heavy, but the good thing about corporate is it gives great grounding in terms of process. The bad thing is it gives you less autonomy to make those decisions that matter in the moment with customers. So which do I enjoy more? Independent, 100%. But I value the time I spent with corporate space, because the processes that I use today and I try and also instill in our teams are loosely based on those processes. So.
And I mean, you've obviously experienced quite a change, I guess, in the sales evolution, in that time, I guess, is how sales works. I suppose it is different environments at the same time, but it has changed. Where do you think sales have gone to today in the sense of what creates effective selling today versus what it used to be perhaps when you started, or is there anything that has changed for you?
Enormously. I mean, so when I got into the trade, I was lucky enough to have 3 months shadowing, who was a very process-driven chap called Fred Nealings. he was about to retire, and I was taking his place. He was a spirits guy, I was a wine guy, and very quickly you could see this behaviour pattern which he had. He'd get into his car, I'd be sat in the passenger seat, and you'd see this routine. He'd go through, his cup would go in his cup, his apple would go in his the cup holder, the second cup holder, his books with all his files would sit in the footwell, and he'd take out individual ones just before a call. He'd mark what he'd done last time, checked that off, checked what he'd agreed, made sure he'd done it, made a few phone calls, gone in. And he was prepared. And then he'd come out and he'd get on his phone, he'd phone through the order, and every single call this process happened. And when I took on the wine position, or sort of change of that territory, people they weren't educated about wine. They didn't know about, they knew about red and white and rosé. They didn't know Chile Merlot. They didn't know Argentinian Malbec. They didn't know New Zealand Sauvignon. This was new to them. So coming in was almost, you were the specialist, and they would take your advice immediately. That was in 2002, 2003. And now people's understanding of wine has grown, so they are educated. We can no longer dictate to them what they should and should not have on a list. It just doesn't work, and people actually are resistant to somebody who comes in and says, "Oh, but you must have." No, I mustn't have. Who says I must have? I'll decide. And so now it's gone to a consultancy model, where only if we understand the value proposition for the customer can we actually make a difference. Because if we don't understand what our product means to them and what it means on their list or in their portfolio or and then to their consumers, then we're fighting a losing battle. So we really have to understand the market, understand who our customers' competitors are, who their customer base is, their customer, the end user, who they are, so that we can say, actually, sometimes my product doesn't work on this list, and that's okay. However, this product from our portfolio, or sometimes even this product from another portfolio or a neighbour, for instance, another winery, I think would work better. And that consultation is worth far more long term, because the trust and the loyalty is driven through that style selling.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that value add beyond your own interests is obviously something which sits really well from an intention point of view with your clients. You've obviously seen your fair share of effective and ineffective salespeople, I suppose. And I guess you started to answer the question a little bit in your previous answer, but are there any kind of traits or attributes or anything that for you, off the top of your head, that differentiate someone who is successful in this game?
Yes, of course. I suppose they need to be able to listen, learn. The willingness to learn and ask questions and build relationships is first the key to building the trust which allows the sale. An element of process. Sales is always broken into science or creativity, generally. And so I want someone who's creative, but I also want someone who's a touch scientific in the way that they think about the preparation and the sale and the return for that sale, not just in investment terms, but in terms of the relationship return, the loyalty return, the trust return, and then also profit return for both parties. So we need to consult on both sides. Yeah. But I want people to be autonomous, to make their own decisions, to be creative enough to say to me, I've got this opportunity, I need to do this. And then my question to them is, have you run the numbers? Does it make sense? How does it feel to you? And then if they can answer those questions, then it's probably the right thing to do.
And it's interesting, the example you used earlier of that sort of quite methodical approach to a process, I suppose, is one element, but I suppose, like you said, you need that artistry or that creativity as an aside to that to interestingly enough, I think where we find is important these days is that sort of problem-solving aspect or element, and I think you've spoken about it earlier. But it's interesting to find, or quite challenging to find, someone who encapsulates both those skill sets or traits. So
agreed, because creative people are generally terrible at admin, and scientific heavy people are generally terrible at trying to find a creative solution to a problem within the market.
Do you then find that perhaps it's good to have a mix of those types of people within a sales team, or?
Once upon a time I did. Once upon a time I thought the science guys should deal with retail, and the creative guys should deal with trade. I'm not sure I still agree with that, given the way that retail now goes.
Sure.
But once upon a time that I would have segmented that way,
Yeah. Which brings us on to this next sort of topic of which we focus a lot on, which is organizational culture as such, and how businesses operate as as cultures. There's a big argument to say that the effectiveness of people within a business is often based on the psychology of the people within the business, and how the environment either lends itself to creating the right psychology or the opposite. What in your mind typifies, and according to your experience, typifies a culture that I guess creates an environment where people do feel like they can optimize their work, etc.? What are some of those elements of that business or the culture as such that for you are important?
Without doing the Myers-Briggs psychology test, I think culturally you need to create a space where people know their expectations, they know what they're shooting for, so the targets are set. I'm not a fan of moving targets, so if you hit your target, well done. And then I would step those targets to say, okay, let's try and hit the next one, but actually the reward comes when you hit your target, not when I move the goalpost. So I think that drives strong cultural sort of sales and achievement within the team. To keep it set, I mean. I think a space where people feel they're developed, that their knowledge is growing, and if they're the right people, they should value that, and that they have the autonomy to make decisions, that they feel part of something which is bigger than themselves, and that they get rewarded for contributing to the growth of that larger entity.
So as a leader within a culture, within an organization, which is often, I guess, one of the toughest roles in terms of keeping a business culture going, what do you find the most challenging aspect about, I guess, leading a sales team and leading people that are dealing with, I suppose, quite a lot of challenges out in the trade, etc.? What do you find is the most challenging part about leading a team like that?
Time to listen to them, I think, is the biggest challenge for me. I often don't think I spend enough time with my guys and girls, if we're just to not be sexist. But I'd love to have more time to spend listening to them and challenging their ways of doing things in a good way. I often feel as if I don't have a lot of time to really develop the guys in a tangible way and take them from A through B to C, and that's always feels like an afterthought where it should be a forethought. That's my biggest challenge.
Sure. Yeah, it's never an easy thing to, I guess, apportion time in the best way, because there's always something which is important on the horizon which we don't always foresee or comes up unexpectedly, etc. On a more individual or personal note, as a wine enjoyer or drinker, what are you drinking at the moment?
Well, I'm about to drink Black Book Winery Pinot Noir, which is English Pinot Noir, tomorrow at a Pinot Noir event. I generally enjoy, though, Chenin Blanc. I have always been a Cabernet lover. So thankfully, I'm here at Waterford. But I started drinking Cabernet at university with a friend of mine, Swan, who was French. We thought we were the bee's knees, with cigars and cab in a jazz bar. But and so that's carried through. Cabernet's been a strong player, so it's always a first, second choice in the house. Am I a fan of crazy varietals and crazy craft, artisanal, vessel and all that stuff? Look, there's a place for it. I'm never a second glass orange wine guy, but I am a first glass. I'd like to taste it, like to see what's going on, but I haven't found one yet that makes me want to buy a case.
Okay.
So,
another question we always ask our guests towards the end of the interview is if you could, if you had to visit one restaurant for the rest of your life, which restaurant would that be?
That's tough. Given the people that I've looked after in my history, I'm probably upsetting at least a few of them. Andrew Fairley's at Glen Eagles, and controversially because of one dish that he did, and he did every time we were there. I won't tell you what was in the dish because it's also controversial, but needless to say, I've never had that dish served like that anywhere else in the world. It was incredible. I'd take my mother's spaghetti bolognese as well.
I think you're appeasing a few people and over that final bit of that answer. Dan, thank you so much for your time. It's always great to chat. And just to end off with an acknowledgement to you, I think what you've done at Waterford with the team and your the value that you've already brought is remarkable. So I think from the outside perspective, it's very clear to see. I just wanted to acknowledge you for what you've done. So thank you for your time and everything that you've done here at the farm as well.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
No worries.
That's it for today, guys. If this episode brought you value, please do subscribe to the podcast series. And for more information on building your organizational culture, visit us at rcaconsulting.biz. We'll see you in the next episode.